Let me ask you a question. How do you get someone to do what you want? I mean, for real. Whether it's your colleague, your kids, or yeah, especially your partner, what actually works? What if I told you that the way most of us try to do this is, well, completely backward? Let's get into it, because the real answer is probably not what you're expecting. See, our usual tactics, offering a reward, maybe making a little threat, they can go spectacularly wrong. And to understand just how wrong, we've got to go back to the early 2000s and look at a story that literally helped bring the entire global economy to its knees.
All right, meet Hank Greenberg. As the CEO of the insurance giant AIG, he was one of the most powerful men in finance. We're talking about a company with $200 billion in assets. His old job was getting thousands of employees to perform at their absolute peak.
So what do you do? Rousing speeches? Team-building retreats? No. If you're Hank Greenberg, you do what you know best. You offer your top guys the chance to earn just staggering amounts of money. He found his rising star, a trader named Joe Cassano, and he made him an offer he simply couldn't refuse.
So here was the deal. Cassano and his team could keep 30 to 35% of all their profits. Now, even on Wall Street, where traders like to say they eat what they kill, this was a massive slice of the pie. It was frankly unheard of.
And did it work? Oh boy, did it work. Cassano's unit grew like crazy. And his personal take from this whole deal? Over $300 million. Now that is the power of an incentive.
And look, this all makes perfect sense, right? Economists have been telling us for years that this is just how the world works. As Edward Lazier puts it, if you pay for output, you get more output. Simple. Incentives are basically the engine of our economy.
But there is a huge, massive catch. What happens when the incentive becomes so powerful that it's the only thing that matters anymore? I mean, really, with a deal this sweet and a payout that big, what could possibly go wrong? Everything. The whole point was to make AIG stronger, but in reality, that giant bonus became the only goal. Cassano's team started insuring billions in super risky debt because it generated huge premiums, and therefore huge bonuses. They just assumed the debt would never lose value. Well, they were wrong. Their risky bets helped fuel the 2008 financial crisis, and taxpayers had to shell out over 180 times billion dollars to bail AIG out.
And believe me, this isn't just a Wall Street problem. Incentives backfire all over the place. Get this, an experiment in Sweden found that paying women to give blood actually decreased donations. It kind of crowded out their simple desire to do a good thing. Or how about in colonial Hanoi, when the French offered a bounty for rat tails to stop an outbreak, which just led to people literally farming rats for their tails. A bad incentive doesn't just fail, it can make things so much worse.
So, okay, if the experts can get this so wrong on a global scale, how do we get it right where it really matters? In our own relationships? Well, it turns out there are 3 pretty simple rules that can help us out.
And what's fascinating is that deep down we seem to already know this. When people were surveyed, they rated praise and offering an exchange as super effective tactics. Nagging, not so much. See, we know positive incentives work best, but so often we still default to the negative ones. Which brings us to rule number 1. Trust is a way more powerful incentive than punishment. Take Jenny and Thorold. When their first kid was born, Jenny was totally overwhelmed, and she started nagging Thorold constantly. And the more she nagged, the more he just pulled away. Her incentive, punishment and guilt, was totally backfiring. Economists have this great little experiment that shows exactly why. It's called the investor game. So an investor gets $10 and can give any amount to a trustee. Whatever they give, it triples. Then the trustee has to decide how much, if any, to give back. The best outcome for everyone is for the investor to just trust the trustee with the full amount. But here's the crazy twist. When the investor was given the option to punish the trustee with a fine if they didn't return enough, a really strange thing happened. Trustees who were threatened actually returned less money. Why? Well, the threat signals distrust. It turns the whole thing into a fight. But when investors chose not to use their power to punish, they were signaling trust. And that trust, it created a partnership, and it was rewarded with way more cooperation and more money coming back.
Okay, rule number 2. Forgiveness is a much better incentive than retaliation. So there's this couple, Paul and Rebecca. Their whole marriage was built on a tit-for-tat system. Everything was perfectly balanced. She handled the finances, he did the cooking. It worked.
Until one day, Paul comes home with a $6,000 Vespa he bought without telling her. bam, the whole agreement was shattered. All of a sudden, Rebecca's incentive to play by the rules was just gone. I mean, if he could break them, why shouldn't she?
This is a textbook example of the tit-for-tat trap. And you can see how fast this thing escalates, right? All it takes is one person to break the rules, and that move almost always leads to punishment, which then triggers retaliation from the first person. And before you know it, you're just locked in this downward spiral of non-cooperation. Rebecca was so tempted to punish Paul. Maybe go on her own little spending spree to even the score. But she realized that would just keep the cycle going. So instead, she did something totally radical. She forgave him. This was like a get-out-of-jail-free card. It completely reset their entire system, and it gave Paul a really powerful incentive to get back on board with their deal. And finally, rule number 3. Thoughtful incentives always beat transactional ones. So Colin and Lily had a problem. He felt like she wasn't showing him enough affection, so he started trying to, buy it. He bought expensive gifts, cashmere sweaters, designer handbags. And you know what? For a minute, it worked. But that effect, it never lasted. And this is a classic problem with purely transactional incentives. There was this experiment where they hired students to do library work. One group got paid the advertised $12 an hour. The other group got a surprise. They were told they'd actually be paid $20 an hour. Now, at first, the $20 group worked harder, sure, but their motivation, it quickly faded. The purely monetary incentive just wore off. Colin discovered the exact same thing. One night, instead of bringing home a fancy gift, he saw Lily was stressed out, and he just came home early, cooked dinner, and put the kids to bed. That single, thoughtful act of taking pressure off of her was a way more powerful incentive for her affection than any $8,000 handbag ever could be. It wasn't a transaction, it was a partnership. So, from the chaos of a global financial meltdown all the way down to the quiet of our own living rooms, the lesson is exactly the same. The most obvious incentives, more money, the threat of punishment, are often the most flawed. The truly powerful incentives are rarely about a simple transaction.
When people in that survey were asked about the nicest gift their spouse ever gave them, the answers weren't about money. They were about things like this: an apology, a moment of acknowledgement, a thoughtful gesture, the things that signal trust and forgiveness and genuine attention.
Ultimately, we are all constantly giving each other incentives, whether we realize it or not. The real question is, are we giving the right ones? So what's the most powerful and thoughtful incentive you can give someone today?